Number 67, I am Craig Zimmerman. I am sitting across from a gentleman with Robert Henkel. Welcome, Robert.
Welcome, thank you.
And you are from the Peter Henkel Incorporated
That's
company.
correct, yes.
And I am told that you are on Marsh Road, just south of
Shea Road.
Road.
Literally
right?
almost on the corner.
Yeah, almost behind the bar.
We are directly behind the bar.
Okay. So
Been in it twice.
a friend of mine referred me to see you, and because he knows I do this interview show, and I
Right.
find it interesting in what you do.
Okay.
The name of Peter Henkel Incorporated does not necessarily tell a person what you do.
This is true.
So you are, I would call you an engine expert that specializes in the boats that were built down in Elginak called Chris Craft.
Yes, basically 99% were parts and engine builders.
Okay.
And it's not a local business. I mean,
Right.
very little local business do I do.
Sure.
And so, but the engine building has been going on for many years, and you know, 90% of it is anything Chris Craft built is
Okay.
what we focus on, as well as the parts aspect
Sure.
of it. If you need a rebuilt transmission or a rebuilt water pump or a manifold, and we have tooling we bought from Chris Craft years
Okay.
ago, and my father bought, and we reproduce gasket kits and exhaust manifolds and things of that nature.
So you probably ship engines all over the country.
We're doing two for a company called Riva right now
Okay,
in
yeah.
Genoa, Italy. And so, I mean, about once or twice a year we'll send an engine to Europe. I've even got one in Anchorage, Alaska.
Okay.
Maybe part of the United States, but you know.
Right, a little ways away.
But yeah, he's far away. We've shipped a couple to Australia. That's pretty rare. New Zealand is every now and then. There apparently was a dealer there at one
Okay.
point, a Chris Craft dealer.
So there's a few of the old mahogany boats sitting around,
Right.
and they need a motor.
Sure.
Okay.
I mean, the majority of it's United States,
Okay.
the lower 48. So, but
So were you born and raised in the Metro Detroit area?
well, I was in Detroit, the east side, and until my father decided he had enough of the automotive industry, which he was an engineer, and we had a summer cottage on Harson's Island.
Okay.
And he bought a marina there. It was the year of '72, which was high water, so
Yeah.
we all worked in boots, knee boots, and moved to Harson's Island.
Okay.
And so I spent junior high and high school there, and then moved back to the east side of Detroit, Grosse Pointe area, and went to school, and went up to school in Traverse City. I was going to go to the Maritime Academy, and then got engaged and instead, and became part of the family business. So.
Okay. So what high school did you go to?
Elginak.
Oh, so you did graduate from Elginak High?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So your father ran the business. Where did he start the business?
Well, in his basement in
Okay.
Detroit, be about '63 when he bought the Scripps Motor Company.
Okay.
And then '72 was the purchase of the marina.
So
And that's where the Chris Craft thing kind of
So the
took
Scripps
off.
name you had mentioned earlier
Yes.
is obviously a name that's been around and still around in
Yes,
some respects.
you still see it.
Scripps Television.
Yes, it was Scripps Howard Broadcasting, because they formed WWJ Radio
Yep.
back in the '20s, I think.
Sure.
That was one of William J. Scripps's companies. And he was kind of the Henry Ford of the marine engine business,
Okay.
because he was 1907. And if you go to Detroit Yacht Club, you'll see the Scripps Trophy.
Okay.
It's for the first guy to get to Buffalo, New York, the fastest, which was probably about 8 miles an hour in 1907, with a gas engine.
Sure.
But, you know, he built the engine that did it. Then he built the first gas engine to cross the Atlantic in 1912. So,
Okay.
and so anyway, that was.
So your father gets a call, or somebody tells him, "Hey, I've got this Scripps boat company for sale that was defunct."
Well, the engine company had just ceased operations.
Okay.
And basically the small block engines had taken over.
Okay.
If you think about the 50s, the small block Chevys and Fords and Chryslers and the Hemis, and boom, these were all, we're rebuilding one this winter. It's 925 cubic inches.
Okay.
It's a V12. I mean, that's a big engine, but I mean, at that point you could buy an engine half the size to develop the same horsepower.
Okay.
And so that basically put them out of business.
Okay.
And so, but there was still a huge market. The military was still buying stuff from them at that time.
So your dad buys that, sort of inherits a bunch of good stuff, some bad stuff, some old stuff.
That's right.
Like when you buy a warehouse full of stuff, you get
Sure.
all kinds of stuff.
You take what you get.
And so he puts together engines. At that point, I'm sure he sold a lot of different things.
Well, he was mostly in the parts business, because once he got into the marina business and got out of the automotive business, you know, of course, he was working 7 days a week running a marina.
Sure.
And in the wintertime, they did very little. And so the engine building was going on, but at not a very high volume.
Okay.
And then, of course, the wooden boat aspect of it took off. Once he brought in a lot of these retired Chris Craft boat builders that were just terrific. I learned a ton of stuff from those
And where
guys.
was that located when he started off himself, when he obviously got out of the basement or garage?
Right, right. Well, again, Harson's Island.
Okay.
Yep.
So at his marina.
At his marina down in the South Channel.
Okay.
And so that also started the parts business, and so it started acquiring the Scripps parts business launched the Chris Craft parts business.
Okay.
I mean, we are chriscraftparts.com now.
Okay.
And so even Chris Craft doesn't have that,
Okay.
which I find interesting. But anyway, so that kind of took off, and that's 95% of our business is all Chris Craft now.
So he's on Harson's Island, he's running a marina,
Yep.
starts this engine component to the business.
Yes.
How long was it on Harson's Island?
72 through 89.
Okay.
And that's when he decided to, well, he stayed in the parts business. And then just, you know, not too long later, he decided he was going to semi-retire. And that became a full-time retirement, and then sadly I lost him.
Okay.
And so as of 2001, I've been running the business, or owned the business.
So then, did you move from Harson's Island to your current location, or somewhere
Well,
in between?
I was living in Harrison Township,
Okay.
and I moved to St. Clair Township up here
Okay.
in 2001. And now I live in East China Township,
Okay.
and have been for 12 years. So basically I've been in the area up here for 22 years now.
Okay.
So the island was very nice. It was an hour commute each way,
Right.
waiting for the ferry
Yes.
mostly. Yes.
Yeah.
So, and you know, the ferry's very nice, but not anyway.
Yeah. So now, fast forward to today. You had mentioned earlier that your father did all components at one time, where they refinished boats.
Yes.
You sort of muddled your way through and said, get rid of this part, get rid of that part, specialize in engines?
Well, it became so demanding. The phone kept ringing. Do you have this part?
Oh,
You know,
okay.
Do you have a crankshaft? Do you have a water pump? Do you have a... And in the meantime, while it became so demanding, in the meantime he had, you know, over 100 boat slips with, you know, just the maintenance and the marina business, that aspect.
Yep.
And then here's the wood shop going over here with the gang working. And fortunately for him, it was seasonal, you know.
Right.
I mean, his life was like a giant week. You know, you had the weekend, that was December through March.
Right.
You know.
Right. Yeah.
But so that's kind of how it evolved, and it became more demanding than anything. So he got out of the marina business.
Okay.
And at that, by then the carpenters, you know, had fully retired and so on. So that was gone. I spun off the wooden boat business.
Okay.
And went off into the city with that for 20 years.
So you did refinishing of boats?
Yes, we were doing refinishing, rebuilding.
Was it mostly all Chris Craft or some other brands as well?
We did some other brands as well, some Fay and Bowens and some Hackers, and I mean a little bit of everything. It was mostly Chris Craft because that was our passion, that was our focus. And especially from Algonac, because growing up down there, I met so many people that worked for Chris Craft that had retired. I mean, from upholstery work to the guy who did the pinstriping on the decks. I mean, to all of these folks that were just worth a wealth of information.
Right.
And so it was quite interesting because I hear on the internet today all these stories from people all over the country saying, well, Chris Craft did this, they did this, they did this, and they really don't know what they're talking about.
Right.
I mean, I don't know everything,
right.
But you know, these guys worked there for many years, and so they knew what they were talking about.
Get the story directly from the...
Sure, and it's quite fascinating. I mean, you know, I should write this stuff down somewhere.
Yeah.
But anyway.
Yeah. So now, what does a day in the life of doing this look like?
Well, this time of year, I'm a phone guy. I'm on the phone and it rings, you hang it up, it rings. If you pick it up, you get 4 calls on waiting, and 2/3 of them are questions usually.
Sure.
How do I do this? But it's big parts sales.
Okay.
And Glenn Kelsey, who is I call my chief engineer, he's basically doing most of the engine assembly. I do a lot of the side parts assemblies and what have you when I can. But that's the primary run in the summer. Now in the wintertime, that aspect slows down, and then we really focus on the engine building. Okay. I mean, I had a guy from the UP call me, a boat company. They wanted to send 3 down, but it doesn't start till like October.
Right. They want to use the boats for the summer.
Right. Finish them off.
Labor Day comes maybe
Yes.
a little later. Now they're thinking winter. Let's get the projects done.
Exactly.
So you're busy all winter.
Right, and so that becomes the primary focus.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a couple of Scripps engines we might be doing, as well. But it's still early in the season. It's the 1st of August today, and fall is starting to show itself, but they haven't quite. It's usually by the end of this month the phone's going to be ringing and I'm going to be to the point I can't finish it until April, May next. And
so. I know a little bit about, but I know sort of the leading edge of it. We had a Chris Craft growing up. I know several people that have Chris Crafts. Mm-hmm. I don't know the number, but are there more than a dozen different motors that go into Chris Crafts?
Oh God, well, what they did is they bought part of a company called Hercules in Ohio in the 30s. I don't know the exact whole story.
Sure.
But they were industrial flathead engines. And there was 1, 2, 3, 4 different blocks that they each made about 4 versions of, kind of with that. And that lasted to the late 50s, and then when the small block Chevy appeared, wow, then they really took off.
Right.
And they had what we called alphabet soup. It was a 283, a 327F, and a Q, and a K, and a G. And they were all the same engine blocks, but they were all different external parts. Okay. And so there was just a million. Then they had the big block Fords and Lincolns, and they used the side oiler Cobra engines briefly, the 427s. Those are gold defined, and then evolved more. As time went on, they started getting less and less engines in the 70s, and by 84 it was all over with.
Now, is more of your work rebuilding the customer's engine, or rebuilding a motor and selling that motor to the customer?
It's custom only.
Okay.
For the customer.
Okay.
Yeah, and a lot of it is basically on order.
Okay.
Like these 2 we're working on right now, they're a matched pair of 283s from the late 50s. They're strictly from our inventory being built to order, for the customer.
Is it very often that a customer comes to you and says, hey, I've got these are in my sea skiff and I'd like them rebuilt?
Yes.
Okay.
Sure.
And do you go to do you bring them to your facility, or do you go to a facility to pull them out?
Well, we have them crate them and they're trucked in.
Okay.
I mean, from a local aspect, we do very little.
Okay.
We've done some definitely in the area, but like I said, the fellow talked to me. He's up in the UP. Now it's drivable, but it's simpler with that much iron. You might we'll just palletize it, and put it on the back of a truck, and. But we do a lot of business with a customer in Vermont, and so again, we truck them back and forth from there. And another one in Montreal, a big collector up there. And but that's just one example. We've sent them as far as California, and we've sent them as far as Toledo. So
Is there one in particular that you stock more of than another because it was more popular?
Well, there'd be 2 actually. There'd be the Chris Craft Model K, which was the Flathead 6, 95 horse. They started with that engine basically, that and the 4-cylinder in the 30s. And they built it almost the longest, then the 283, which appeared in late 58 and built through about 66 from their aspect of it. And they built, the 283s, they built 40,000, or Marinized, pardon me, 40,000 of them, approximately. So there's a lot out there. And,
now, since you're ChrisCraftParts.com, is that it?
Yes.
Okay. So are you hunting for parts all the time?
Yes.
Okay.
Constantly.
Okay. Now there was
we have a group of people, thank God, that appear in our driveway with the pickup trucks and trailers.
Okay.
I got a pair of Ks or 283s or 327s, and do you want them? I go, yeah,
Sure.
yeah, bring them on. I mean, we'll drive and pick things up. I'm shipping a whole pallet of stuff out of Seattle this week.
Okay.
Because it's getting harder to find.
So it's shipping into you?
All the way from that distance, which is pretty rare.
Okay.
I mean, and I don't even know what the transport costs are. It's changing. The transport company rates change by the day.
Yes.
Anyway, but that's kind of part of how it's done. But I've bought groups of engines in Detroit and down in Ohio, and we cleaned out a marina in southern Indiana once. I mean, so you never know. It all depends on what's there. They pick up the phone, and of course now we've got cell phones, so you text me a picture, and now you can say, no, wait a minute, that ain't, because I've also gone a distance and found a bunch of scrap iron that I don't want. So
Now, if a person was rebuilding their own boat, is it possible to take I'm just using an example, an LS motor out of a car and retrofit it to a boat? Yes.
Well, again, if you look at what Chris Craft did, or pretty much any of them, in Mercruiser, Crusader, etc., they all bought blocks mostly from General Motors.
Right.
Ford sold them a lot of stuff, and Chrysler had their own marine division.
Sure.
I mean, even from the 20s on up, that's a whole other aspect, and then we do some of those. But yeah, everything was a Chevy-based block. But you got to consider a marine conversion that's it. The marine company made everything else.
Right.
And so that's kind of where it becomes very unique and very specific. So, a lot of guys will call me, well, I've got a 350. I got a 350 what?
What? Right.
And we need the alphabet soup. We need the G, K, the Q, the F, from Chris Craft. And because every water pump was different. Every transmission, well, most transmissions, but,
I'm somewhat involved in the collector car hobby, and it probably, this will transfer over to boats too, but I've seen some people talk about, the collector car hobby, and they'll say something about somebody saying, well, this 1972 Jaguar had XYZ type headlights on it, but yours has two different kinds. And one of the guys will go, well, if you were at Jaguar in 1972 when they built the car, if it was Friday afternoon and they ran out of headlights,
yes,
chances are you got two different headlights.
Well, the truth to that is true, and it's true of them all.
Yes.
I mean, one of the old Chris Craft guys used to talk about what really happened inside the factory.
Right.
I mean, and it was a lot of fun. You used to laugh because for lunch they get 15 minutes, and they'd go measure the boats coming off the assembly lines. There wasn't one that was the same.
Same, right.
And so the famous thing is the color of the engine. It's called Chris Craft Blue, and it's almost similar to it's this lighter blue.
Yeah.
And they argue on the line, and I just crack up listening to it go on and on and on because, oh no, it's a wrong shade. They're going back and forth. Every day the guy stirring it didn't stir it as much as the day as the guy before, and they were all different, constantly. And then Chris Craft wasn't that fanatical. It had runs in it. They had bugs stuck in it. I mean, get it in the boat and out the door,
Yeah, the one thing they used in this meeting I was in, they were talking about, they said, well, Friday afternoon at 3 o'clock and they're out of headlights, Nigel didn't worry about where it was coming from.
That's right.
Same thing down at the factory in Algonac.
Sure, it was out of a sedan or it was out of an E-Type, I mean, whatever.
Yeah,
yes.
So they needed a part. They weren't going to worry about where it came from. I'm sure the same thing happened down there in Algonac.
Sure.
With a part that was going in a boat.
Sure.
In your facility, without knowing numbers, would you have 20 engines, 100 engines?
Well, they're all in pieces now, pretty much. They come in and we just start tearing them down because 2/3 of them are scrap.
Okay.
There are a lot of them, things like oil pans. They're cast iron. I mean, you couldn't kill one of these things. Every now and then people crack one. But anyway, the answer is probably about 50 to 70 in that range, but all in various conditions.
Okay.
I mean, this year we've bought 20 engines probably this year. Last year was probably 10 or 15. I've bought as many as 40 engines at a time, so.
Now, is there any ebb and flow to that if you talk about it, let's say, on a yearly basis from the standpoint of there was a finite number of those engines built years ago.
Right.
Is there plenty of them around for you to?
The field is thinning.
Okay.
It is.
That was my next thought. So
Yeah.
where do you go from there?
I mean, in the old days, everyone had one in the garage, or
Right.
at least around here. You
Right.
know. I mean, the place was up the street, you know, kind of, sort of.
Yeah.
And now, not as much. You know, it was like the proverbial barn find,
Right.
whether it's a boat or a car or something. You
Sure.
know. And those have kind of evaporated. Every now and then you'll hear somebody, I found this in a barn. You know,
Right.
and like, wow.
Wow. I haven't seen
Wow.
those in a while.
You know, yeah, we used to see them all the time. And
Right.
half the time we said, we don't want that one.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
you know, but you know, back in the day too, you go back to the the 60s and the 70s, and they were cutting them up. The marinas
Sure.
were ending up with them. You know, the guy walked away from it,
Right.
and so they were just chopping them up or burning them. Back
Right.
in those days, you legally you just set
Yep.
them on fire.
Fire and burn them up.
And, right, and that went on left and right, left.
Burning
and right.
with the motors in them, or were they taking them out
It
first?
depended on the boatyard.
Okay.
And you know, and that started to change in the 70s, and of course in the 80s, all of a sudden these boats, wait a minute,
That's worth some money.
that's being collected. You know?
Yeah.
Yeah. We used to have a friend of ours that worked on Lake Tahoe, California. Every year he would come out here and buy boats left and right because they were a third the cost of what they were out there.
Yeah.
And there weren't that many out there. And they were here. I mean, he went to other places like in the upstate New York and New Hampshire's was the Lake George, Lake Winnipesaukee, and
Sure.
places like that were popular and still are. But again, that was what kind of started the equation. And now there's stuff that's $500,000.
Right.
And that's unfortunately not the Chris-Craft stuff.
Right,
That's-
right.
that's-
So now
but-
you've got a website that somebody can go to and get a part, order a part?
Well, we're not that advanced
Right, right,
in a sense, but it's basically, it shows you our story and a large amount of what we have
Sure.
in inventory, you know, a water pump, a transmission, it's a carburetor, et cetera,
Sure.
you know, if you need that. I mean, you know, all of it couldn't be posted because there's just so much.
So many
of it.
parts and so many different
And,
variations.
Right. And
So-
but in essence, the answer to your question is yes.
So somebody has a boat locally and they want a engine or a part, I would
Right.
assume that the first thing they need to do is have the VIN number available, or the engine block or number?
Well, it's got to be that letter.
Okay.
It is. It's like I said. It's alphabet soup. And these guys. Well, I got a 350 Chevy.
I know.
And I have this every day. I almost say this, and it just kind of cracks me up. And it's, I really need that letter. Once you tell me that letter, he says, I've got the GM. I don't need that. That letter told me everything.
Okay.
And so that's the whole thing. So if you can tell me you got a Model K or a B or an
Is
M
that right
or-
on a tag?
Yeah, usually, providing the engine is complete, yes,
Sure.
they would stamp it in the manifold, a big brass tag with a serial number.
Okay.
And but it would also give you a code too. It would say model MLRO. Okay, M, okay, series L, long stroke, R reduction, O is opposite rotation because twin engine boats they had an opposite rotating engine. So I mean, say okay, all right, now that tells me everything I need to know. So,
What's the biggest challenge in your business right now?
finding bearings and piston rings.
Okay.
Our friends that make piston rings, I won't mention any names, but the biggest one here in Michigan made them for everybody pretty much, and they don't care. And the biggest bearing company in the world too, based out of Chicago, will not make the bearings anymore. So there's some imported bearings that are available which we don't like to use. I just bought a box in Ohio, and I think it's World War II surplus of bearings.
NOS.
For Hercules.
New old stock.
That's right. But these are high quality.
Okay.
And because I'm putting a warranty on an engine that's going, let's say, to California.
Sure.
Well, if something goes wrong with it, hell, it's $1,200 to ship it one way back, and another $1,200 to ship it back, and that's after we fix it for free.
Right.
So I won't risk using the Chinese bearings.
That's what I was just going to ask you.
Yeah. So, so that's been kind of the biggest issue, because we have been to the American companies, and groups of us have gotten together. So we will all take. We'll take 5,000 sets, and they still won't do it.
That volume doesn't mean enough to them?
No, it's going to be 5,000 an hour.
Right.
You know, I mean, that's the problem. And the bean counters have gotten in there, and they've
Right.
looked at the production. And since the past 3 years and the COVID and all that stuff, that really has really changed a lot of way people think about big business anyway.
Now, is, you know, invention and knowing how to produce things is an issue in a lot of things. With, say, bearings and pistons, do you think there'll be any, say, companies that are started because of that and are able to manufacture in the U.S.?
I don't think so, because I don't think they can make any money at it, because it's quite complicated. What it's really becoming is, as an example, one of these Scripps engines. They're between $30,000 and $60,000 to rebuild.
Sure.
But they don't have bearing shells. We pour Babbitt bearings. We have them out and have them lined. It's quite complicated. Everything is custom made.
Sure.
It's becoming that with all these Chris-Craft engines now, because we're going to take the bearing shells and we send them out and have them recoated with what they call Babbitt material.
Okay.
And then it's set back in the block, and they machine it to fit the crank. And so it is becoming an exotic. You talk about Jaguar.
Sure.
You know, I'm sure to take a 61 E-type and rebuild the engine would be incredibly, you know, you just
Yes.
don't go to Napa and get
Right.
a rebuild
Parts.
kit.
Yeah.
Right. So thus these engines are becoming a little more of a very expensive hobby. And it's frustrating.
Sure.
Because we chase a lot of people away doing that. But, you know, I mean, the bottom line is that it's what it costs to do it now.
So then so you've got bearings now for a period of time.
Yes, and we're looking now, but we're going to get to the point where we'll have to, again, rebuild the original shell bearings and have that done. And it's just expensive.
Expensive to do.
Yes.
Okay.
And it gets time consuming.
Right.
And so, I mean, will things change with the bigger companies, you know, as things progress? But we can't see it at this point.
Sure.
You know, the way the economy looks, it's kind of,
Right,
you know,
right.
so, you know, and interest rates. And anyway, the thing is that we're semi-optimistic in that respect. But it's going to become an exotic engine is what it's going to be.
Now, does anything with some of this robotics or computers allow people to make things in smaller batches, like a 3D printer type of a scenario with technology?
It's something worth looking into. The answer is I don't know.
Yeah.
It's a concept.
Seems as though from what I've heard and just seen in articles that the 3D printer sort of lends itself to prototype type parts with plastics.
Well, you're right in a lot of things. As an example, in 1984 when Chris-Craft sold again and they divided up everything,
Sure.
we ended up buying the tooling for all their gasket kits.
Okay.
And it's becoming too expensive for me to make them. They stamp them out. We don't have the tooling. I have a company to do it.
Sure.
Now they can laser cut them.
Yeah.
Now you can buy the damn laser cutter yourself, and you know, it's not cheap, but it's going to pay for itself in time if you
Sure.
you're producing. So that type of thing, you know, we're starting to see. And exhaust manifolds. I've got a very complicated exhaust manifold, and all the patterns were very expensive to make to pour this thing in aluminum or iron. And now they can take the little computer chip that had the design on it, put it in their computer, and they can produce all of this thing. We just ran our first prototype. A company out in Vermont just did it. I haven't seen it yet. And I haven't heard the numbers yet.
Right.
But nonetheless, we're seeing what we can do with it in the sense of, because we cannot find replacements.
Okay.
And as an example, we're dealing with cast iron.
Sure.
And you can't weld cast iron like you can weld steel. And so there's a lot of, to make these things accurate, look original, and again, so replacement parts are more necessary.
Now, do you have a dyno that you run engines on?
Depending on the customer and depending on the engine, we will ship them out and have them tested.
Okay.
Generically, with the smaller, like the Model K and the 283s, we'll put 7 to 10 hours on the stand.
Okay.
In-house.
Sure.
And just, usually if something will fail, it will happen within the first, usually 10 minutes.
Okay.
Or, but we'll run them for, again, 7 to 10 hours roughly.
Would you say you've done thousands of rebuilds yourself?
Not quite that many.
Okay.
We do probably 20 to 30 a year.
Okay.
Would be but it all depends on what year. We just finished a 1928 Chris Craft A120 engine. It's 825 cubic inch V8.
Wow.
Okay, the chrome plating bill was $8,000. Just that is the cutesy stuff on it. That was just the chrome.
Wow.
So that was a 12-month project.
Wow.
So thus, that year we built a lot less.
What kind of boat would that have gone in?
They put them in Chris Craft a number of boats. They're big commuters, but they also put them in their triple cockpit 26, 28, 30 footers at the time. And it just went up to a collector in Montreal who's already got 2 more on the waiting list. But he also now spun it off to a museum out west. So that was interesting.
Now, did any of the Chris Crafts of the 70s, the bigger, the 50-foot big boats, would they have had diesels? Yes,
about 42.
Okay.
I ran into a 50-footer with gas engines in it, and the funny story is, I'll be real quick, is that it would get 9 miles an hour and it burnt 28 gallons an hour.
That's why they went to diesel.
That's why they went to diesel, right there. I mean, right there, even when gas was cheap. I mean, I don't know, But.
Now, do you deal anything with diesel?
No.
Okay.
No.
Totally different animal.
Yeah, Chris Craft bought them. They never made one.
Okay.
Never made one.
Okay. So now it's August 1st, and Peter Henkel Incorporated is running, and you're sort of setting up before the busy season starts in September, October. How much of your winter is already filled?
Tentatively, nothing's in stone yet. I would say we're 50% full.
Okay.
Largely because we've got some of these big Scripps engines to do, and possibly another A120. But again, some of these projects the boat is 2 years out.
Sure.
They're restoring the boat. So these big exotic engines can go that long. Because we're never doing just one and then one. There's always 3 or 4 in the process.
In the process.
Right now we have 3 in the works, and then this fall will be interesting. I'm starting to we see the response to things like raising interest rates and what the cost of things are going, how they're going to affect this. I mean, this is the toy market, let's face it,
Right.
So.
But generally speaking, the expensive motors and projects are people with typically have expendable, income.
It really used to be the regular guy, most of it could afford it.
Sure.
And he still kind of can,
right.
But it's slowly evaporating, and
it's going up.
It's like, I have a lot of European parts customers.
Okay.
And pretty much I'll deal with a boat company, or I'll deal with the individual. And if I'm dealing with the boat company, they get a wholesale price. The individual, he's expecting a very expensive price because he's not the middle of the road guy. Because their taxes are so high over there, they can't.
Sure.
The middle of the road guy can't afford it.
Can't afford it.
And so it's interesting, and I guess that's a little bit what I'm starting to see here. Again, but equally it goes back to the cost of like bearings and piston rings and all these custom-made parts now. And again, there's nothing really production. Try anything. Valve guides are still mass-produced. That's about it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, so you've been in the business quite some time, and you're in your 60s, I'm assuming.
I'm 62.
Okay. What's the long-range plan for Peter Henkel, Inc.?
Well, I don't play golf.
Okay. So it's sort of what you do.
It is sort of what I do. Down the road, I would like to semi-retire. The young man I mentioned earlier, I'm hoping that he's grown up with it too.
Sure.
And his grandfather was one of the guys around Algonac with all the Chris Craft guys, and I'm hoping he's going to take over.
Okay.
I'd love to see him do it. And because I think that there's going to be a market. The only thing that scares me now is gasoline. You know, are they going to take that away from us someday?
Right.
You know, that's the whole thing. You know, they're forcing electric cars on us, and will they take away the gasoline in that process? Right. And I hope not. It'll probably become very expensive. Again, kind of like Europe, where it's $10, $12 a gallon. You know, it'll be again, which makes this whole hobby
crazy
a very
expensive.
wealthy man's hobby, rather than the regular middle of the road guy.
Well, I see that, and I don't know that this is anything similar, but I hear and I've read some articles that in high-end cars are starting to do e-fuels, where Porsche and Ferrari are starting to find out ways to make their own fuels. Again,
well, the hydrogen fuel cell was that made more sense than the electric, at least to me, from a mechanical perspective, and equally from a toxicity perspective. But anyways, that's another story.
And that whole thing, sorry to interrupt, but that whole thing, I'm not a mechanic, but I understand that you can take an internal combustion engine and run it on hydrogen is the idea.
Right, and the exhaust is water.
Right.
Yeah.
So that...
and you know where you make hydrogen from? Water. A whole bunch of it on Earth.
Exactly. Well, and I've heard discussions in the automotive industry, they did talk about that issue.
They were working on that until COVID, and then it kind of disappeared, and then the electric thing appeared. But I think there's some politics involved.
And I still think that will come around, though, because there's specific...
The market will dictate it, yes.
The market will dictate, because there are certain scenarios that, and just one I'll use is like over-the-land trucks.
Yes.
You know, hydrogen seems to be the answer, because if you're going to drive from here to Kentucky or Tennessee or Florida or anywhere.
There's trucks that drive from here to southern Mexico. I mean, absolutely. They have no choice. I mean, you're not going to be recharging and recharging and recharging. You can't. You couldn't afford it anyway. You know. So you know, let's keep the gas around.
Exactly. And I see always the market making it right in the long run.
Well, nature will evolve. I mean, you know, okay, why did people buy Model Ts? Well, because the horse and buggy was a lot of screwing around, and a Model T made life a lot easier.
Yes.
You know, it's kind of a corny story, but it's the truth. And so make me a modern vehicle that I want, rather than I'm forced to buy.
So on a daily basis, you see many more telephone calls than you do see people driving up your driveway.
Yes, yes, just because of the distance.
Sure.
Because I've very few Michigan customers. I probably have maybe 50 or 100 Michigan customers.
That's funny how that is.
That's it.
And there's how many companies that say do what you do, roughly?
I'm going to say 3 or 4 in the country, you know, that we compete with. And again, we all know each other, you know.
Sure.
And some of us buy each other's parts, you know. You know, he's already making it, why should I make it? You know, makes sense, you know. I mean, I'll buy his part. Hopefully he buys my stuff that he doesn't make, so, you know. And,
so is more of your parts purchasing where they actually, because you've been in business so long, they're coming to you, or you're having to search it out?
Well, a lot of it is history in the sense, and I'm going to say if it wasn't for my father, I wouldn't be sitting here, you know, I mean. But we've been at it long enough, so I think we've established pretty well nationally. I used to have a 40-foot wooden cruiser, and this gal with her boat next door was an attorney, and she traveled the world. But anyway, she was in Sweden, and she wandered into a marina there, and they knew us. I went, well,
she was astounded, right?
Wow, yeah, and because they had a couple of old Chris Crafts there, and they had bought parts from us, you know. And so I thought that was pretty interesting, that far away. You know? So, but again, the nature of the business is there's so few of us, and you know, it's interesting. I have a bound set of motorboating magazines that came from the office of Scripps Motor Company going back to 1920. Okay. I've got 80 books. They're about this thick. So the history is fascinating. And you go back and you can see the dealer structure that Chris Craft had in the late 20s.
Right.
They had them all over the world. This little company in Algonac, and they did brilliantly, you know. And so thus we see them just about everywhere.
Now, do boat companies that build their own say, mahogany boats.
Mm-hmm.
I know there's a company up in northwestern Michigan. Is it Van
Well,
Dam? Or?
Yeah, Van Dam's up there. He's one of, there's a number of custom yards.
Would a company like that buy parts from you?
No, they would go with Modern Power.
Okay.
They would definitely would go with Modern Power.
Okay.
And I mean, even if I was them, I hate to say it, I would probably say put something new in it.
Yeah.
It's funny. It's illegal to repower an old boat with a new engine now.
Is that right?
Yeah, anything before 1975, you can't put a new engine in it. It's an EPA law.
You learn something every day.
I didn't believe until my distributor sent me the paperwork from the EPA. But anyway.
That's interesting.
But no. So it's interesting.
Okay.
And so
it's
it'll be a lot of fun.
chriscraftparts.com.
Yes.
Peter Henkel Incorporated.
Yes.
Thank you, Robert Henkel, for
thank
coming
you.
in.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Have a great day. If anybody wants to suggest anybody else that's very informative or interesting like Mr. Henkel, please send them my way. This is number 67 of In the Zone in the books. And thank you to Paul Dingham and Bruce Holliday and Reed Packin for taking care of everything in the control room. Thank you very much.